Hello, my name is Pam Bartha and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. And I'm very happy to spend this time with you talking about my review of a mini documentary series that was on one of our global television. It's a local network in Canada. And they did this very recently. They did this documentary series on the story of multiple sclerosis in Canada. So I just want to say hello to a few people that are joining us here. So hello, Dana and Margaret and Olivia and Billy. So people are starting to join in. So what I'd like to do is I'm just going to start over because people are joining in. My name is Pam Bartha and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. Today we are going to be talking about a documentary series that it recently was on our local television network in Canada. So if you're not in Canada, I don't know if you have access to it or not, but honestly, you'll hear my review of it. So you may not want to waste your time with it. But in this documentary series, a mini docu-series, they talked about a lot of different things with multiple sclerosis, especially the story of multiple sclerosis in Canada. And what I would love for you guys to do is, as I'm talking about the important things they were talking about and giving you my take on it, I would love for you guys to share also, what are your views on these different things that I'm going to be discussing? And please share this and like it and send me some love if I'm saying something that really resonates with you. It's very important that we talk about these issues because unfortunately, it's really sad. This mini docu-series, it was so depressing. It was awfully depressing, so behind the times, so unbalanced, and very unfortunate. Anyhow, so what I would like you guys to do is, number one, please interact with me. So make sure that you post your comments. Even if you're listening to the replay, make sure you post your comments and share your views on what I'm going to be talking about. So there were many different things discussed in this docu-series. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about 3 points because there's a lot to talk about. And these are really big topics to talk about. The first one, they were talking about how, thank you so much for all the love. The first one, they were talking about how years ago, it would take years to be diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I don't totally believe that because I was diagnosed pretty quickly. But for some people, yes. Right? Some of you may relate to that. Maybe you've had some little symptoms and then they kind of settle down. And so then, you didn't get another attack or relapse for a few years later. And I've talked to hundreds of people and that's the case for some people. But for myself, I had a severe case of optic neuritis, so bad that it was like a black patch over my eye. And I went to see a specialist on the west coast of Canada, and he diagnosed me for sure with multiple sclerosis because it was like a complete blackout on my eye for about 6 weeks. So I was on heavy prednisone for that. But now we have the MRI, and people think, wow, this is great because it can give us the answer and it can tell us in minutes versus years for some people if we have multiple sclerosis or not. There is a problem with that though, and that's what I want you guys to be aware of, that the MRI is not a 100% accurate diagnosis for multiple sclerosis. And why is that? There's 2 big problems. Number one is that there are people that have no neurological diseases that are walking around out in our cities and towns that have these lesions in their central nervous system. So there are different researchers that have studied this, and they have found that some people that have no disease have these lesions. Some people that have autism and Crohn's disease. So there's other kinds of diseases where people have these lesions in their brain. So it's not just an MS thing. That is a really big issue, right? So that's the first one. And number 2 is that there is this, and it's a big word, I'm going to say it, and you guys can search this on your own. So do a Google search, but it's clinical, so like clinical, but clinico with an O at the end, clinical radiological paradox. All right, that's what you have to look up. Clinical radiological paradox and MRIs. Do a Google search of that. You'll see that there's a whole bunch of different studies. And what does that mean, all those big words? What it means is that they're using the MRI as a primary diagnostic tool with multiple sclerosis, But the problem is it's giving them results that are not consistent and not clear and conflicting, right? Conflicting results. So the big deal there is that it's not a 100% accurate diagnosis for multiple sclerosis. So first of all, we know that other people have these lesions that do not have MS, that do not have neurological symptoms. Maybe they have other diseases. Maybe they don't have a disease label yet. Should they be there? No. The lesions are pockets of infection. They shouldn't be there. But what I see in students is also that there are students that I work with in our program and they become symptom free. And this is not just for a few months, but they're like disabled, like in a scooter. And in 3 months they work, and not everyone can go that fast, but I've seen this up to like as short as 3 months, where people that have been, Terry Kiley, for example, she's a student that graduated. She was in a scooter for 8 years. And in 90 days, she was off all her meds and she was starting to walk again. She was not running. She hadn't used her leg muscles for at least 8 years. So she was doing squats in the doorway. She was on her exercise bike because her balance was back. But she still had lesions on the MRI because they did do a follow-up. So we're seeing that students are becoming symptom-free for years, coming off their meds, and they still have lesions. So we don't want the lesions in our central nervous system, but they are not the end-all be-all for our diagnosis with MS. So what's happening with my students, someone like Terry, is that after at least a year of being off of all her meds, and she goes in for her appointment with her neurologist, and her MRI is about the same lesions are there, but she's passing all of the different tests, the different reflex tests and things that they do. So her doctor said, we're here for you, but you don't need to come back if you don't want to. So that's the exciting thing, is that we have to understand that when we're getting that MRI done, yes, we don't want to find lesions in our central nervous system. That's not a good thing. That would indicate little pockets of infection, inflammation and infection. But it's not the end-all be-all of, do I have MS or don't I have MS? So even though we're using it as a big diagnostic tool, it is not the big diagnostic tool that gives us the conclusive answer. All right. So that's the big thing on that big takeaway. So that's kind of old. That's the problem with a lot of the things they were talking about. They're very biased, very medically biased. This whole program was, and it was very disappointing. I would have hoped they would have had more of a well-rounded approach. The second one is, women have multiple sclerosis at least 3 times higher. There's a 3 times higher incidence of multiple sclerosis in women than in men. And so what they're doing in research is they're starting to look at the central nervous system, and they're like, what's so different about men and women? And I think they're off on a bunny trail, honestly, because when we look at autoimmune disease in general, and that's things like arthritis and Crohn's disease and Hashimoto's and psoriasis and MS, there are over 100 autoimmune diseases, like many of them. And at least 80% of the people that have autoimmune disease are women, right? So it's not a neurological thing. It is, okay, good. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Yeah, everybody can hear me. So this is not MS is a neurological autoimmune disease, and there's a discussion about that, whether it is truly autoimmune or not, but it is a neurological degenerative disease. But we're seeing it more in women than in men. So if it's not something that's in our central nervous system that's different, then what is it? I really believe it's our hormones. That for sure, there may be other factors that we will see in time, but the reason that I believe it's our hormones is that when we're out of balance with the microbes in our body, especially the GI tract, I talk a lot about how we end up getting leaky gut and how these microbes move into the blood and they move into different parts of our body, and they like to set up camp all over the body. And with our hormones, we know that with the changing of the cycle of our hormones, it affects the biochemistry in our body in many different ways that we don't even understand. 2 ways that it will change our biochemistry. Let's just consider the 2 weeks before our period, so 2 weeks before menses. We know that in that period of time, progesterone is a lot higher, and that is the pregnancy hormone. That's in case we were going to decide to start a family or have another child, and that's the hormone that builds up, and that would continue on through pregnancy. But that hormone, how 2 little ways that it impacts our change in our body is that it increases our blood sugar levels. So when the progesterone is higher, our blood sugar levels are higher. If we are out of balance with microbes in our digestive tract, in our vaginal tract, anywhere in the body, they're going to benefit because most of them love sugar. They love glucose. So that's a really big factor. And then we also know that, for example, with higher progesterone, we have more of a suppressed inflammatory immune response, which means that your immune system is not going to be in the fighting mode that it normally would be if it's coming across infection. And that would be to protect the baby if you were going to be wanting to have a family, have another child. So we have this natural dampening down of the immune system, of the inflammatory part, of the fighting part. We also have an increase in blood sugar. So those two little things on their own would really benefit bad microbes if we're out of balance. So then the research supports this also. In my book, Become a Wellness Champion, I share how they've done studies on women where they collect their blood just before their menses and different times too, and they're finding that they have higher counts of candida antibodies just before their periods. And it's lower at different times of the month. And this is in women that do not have a yeast infection. So they can see that we have more antibodies against candida just before our menses. That's a really big deal. And we know too, as women, that some of us have PMS symptoms right before our periods. And that just means those microbes are a lot more active. How do I know that? Because when women go through my program and they treat those infections, they no longer have PMS symptoms anymore. So that is the key. It can be nutritional deficiencies too, absolutely, but it's mostly caused by the microbes being out of balance. So that is why I believe that women are much more prone to having these infections which cause autoimmune disease and cause specifically multiple sclerosis, because that's what we're talking about today, than men. So that's a really, really big factor. And in time, as more and more of this information gets out, we will know that. So the third reason, or the third topic that I wanted to talk about, is why is Canada such a hotbed for multiple sclerosis? Why? So we've talked about things like, well, maybe it's that we don't get enough sunshine here. But there's a lot of other countries that don't have as much sunshine, right? And so I do believe that there are multiple factors involved, just like there's multiple infections involved, right? It's not like all of us in Canada are getting multiple sclerosis, so there are differences. But I want to share with you something really, really profound. I found some research, and I'm just going to read it to you because it's awesome. Just a little sentence. So we know that in Canada, it's a hotbed for multiple sclerosis. It's, I think, the highest incidence in the world is in Canada. But then if we were to look at the globe, and we were to look at other countries in Europe that are along the same longitude as Canada, we see that they're not as high with multiple sclerosis. Some of them are high, but not as high. And so what we would think is, so maybe it's not just that we're at this level and we have colder temperatures. There's more to it for sure. Obviously, we do have a little less sun than, if you're closer to the equator, for sure. So the sunshine definitely is important with vitamin D and our immune system. But honestly, I've spoken to at least 700 people that suffer with multiple sclerosis by now, and everybody is on vitamin D supplements and they still have the MS. So that is not the answer. But yes, if you're low on vitamin D, definitely supplement for sure. So then we think about, well, Lyme disease, because Lyme has really been implicated, and I've talked about how Borrelia is found in multiple sclerosis very, very often. But is it the biggest culprit? Is it the main culprit? Well, when we look at the incidence of Lyme disease in North America, for example, we see that there's more of a hot spot or a hotbed on the East Coast in the United States. That is a little bit more concentrated. So then you would think that that would have more multiple sclerosis there. So I'm just going by common sense. This is not a scientific study, but I'm getting you guys to think, because a lot of times we are not using common sense anymore. But what is so interesting is that if you guys have been following me at all, and I've been sharing some groundbreaking research, So we know infection is the biggest cause with multiple sclerosis. I have a beautiful document that I've created for you. It's on my website, livediseasefree.com, and hopefully Danielle can stick the link in the feed of this video. But on that page I created for you, it's called Evidence that Multiple Sclerosis is an Infectious Disease. When you go through that, you're going to see so many studies where they're finding, number one, fungal overgrowth, right? And bacterial infections and Lyme, the Borrelia, which is the Lyme, and other co-infections like Babesia and Bartonella. But what's so groundbreaking that is really new to me, I know we have parasites, but I didn't know we had these nematodes. There's this little tiny nematode. It's a little parasitic worm, and they find it in domestic animals for sure. The veterinarians have known that it infects domestic animals for like 100 years. They've known this. And guess what those animals feel like when they have these infections? They have symptoms identical to multiple sclerosis. They get spasticity, the spastic gait, they get drop foot, they get paralysis, they get numbness, they get balance issues, all of that, vision, they go blind. It's like identical to multiple sclerosis. Veterinarians have known this for 100 years, and what do? They treat them with anti-parasitic drugs like ivermectin and other ones. So if that is the case, then is it possible that these tiny microscopic worms could infect humans? Yes. Dr. Alan McDonald in 2014, he was asked to look at a person who had died of multiple sclerosis. He had MS for 20 years, Lyme disease for 10 years, and the family said, could you please see if he had Lyme Borrelia in his brain? So then Dr. Allen, he is a hero pathologist. You guys have to listen to his interview if you haven't yet. It is on YouTube, and all you have to do, thank you so much for all the love, all you have to do is go to YouTube and type in Dr. Alan McDonald and multiple sclerosis, and you will see his lecture, something like multiple sclerosis is a parasitosis. And about 5 minutes into the video, that's where he really goes into all the research. So yes, he did look at that gentleman who passed away from MS and Lyme disease, and he found Borrelia, which is Lyme disease, in his brain, in his spinal fluid in his brain. But he found a lot more of these little parasitic worms, these nematodes, these tiny, tiny little nematodes. He also found that the spinal fluid was chalky, like gucky, white stuff in it, like the feces and poop from these microbes and waste products. So he's like, the spinal fluid should be clear. It should not look like that. So then he thought, well, I wonder if this could be in the brains or the spinal fluid of other people that have died of MS. So he went to a brain bank and he got another 9 specimens of people that had died from MS. All of them had nematodes especially in their spinal fluid, tons of them. So this is groundbreaking. And then recently, I have been in contact with a beautiful wellness champion in Sweden. Her name is Lisa. She has MS, and she has been looking at her blood and looking at the blood of other MS patients and finding these nematodes in the blood. So these little worms in the blood of people that suffer with multiple sclerosis. So this is really, really huge. So what happens is that we go on antibiotics, we lose that natural defense that's in our intestines that would protect us from these invaders. Then we become infected with not just these little worms, big worms, etc. But the problem is that as these worms in our intestines become more and more populated, they move into our central nervous system. They move into our blood first. They spill over into our blood. That's why they're finding them in the blood of MS patients. Then they eventually spill over into our central nervous system, and that's when we start to get these really strong neurological symptoms. So, and it's also in the gut too, because we know that as we treat the gut, the symptoms settle down. So there is this big connection between the neurons in our digestive tract linking up to our brain. So it's all interconnected, but who cares? You treat these different infections and people are recovering. It's not as simple as just killing nematodes. That's the problem, is that these nematodes, they carry their own microbes inside of them. When they come into us, into our central nervous system, they bring in with them Borrelia. They are infected with Borrelia. How do we get these nematodes? They can be passed even through ticks, through mosquitoes, and they carry their own fungus and Borrelia into our central nervous system. So I wanted to share that with you, because why is Canada such a hotbed for MS? Well, there is an amazing statistic that I found from a study, and they looked at the incidence of multiple sclerosis in Canada, and they found that if you live on the prairie provinces versus living in Quebec, but like in the prairie provinces, you double your risk for multiple sclerosis. That is really, really huge. So the prairies are the hotbed. So what's different about the prairies? The prairies are very rural. We have a lot of agriculture. We have a lot of domestic animals. I grew up with horses, and we had cows and dogs, and we didn't have sheep and goats, but all those domestic animals that could carry these nematodes. And we're also a grain belt. We have a lot of carbohydrates. It's a really big part of our diet because we grow it, and it's everywhere. And by now it is everywhere also, the grains for sure. But the problem is that with our high carbohydrate diet, that is feeding the problem more. But the biggest thing is that we are exposed to probably a lot more nematodes than maybe somebody in a bigger city that is not in a rural area. I think that is really profound. That makes a lot of sense, especially when they're finding these nematodes in the central nervous system. Science knows that these nematodes can be passed from animals to humans. So why would it be that I haven't had a chance, I don't even know if I have nematodes in my blood. I am going to, in the next few weeks here, I'm hoping to be set up with a microscope. I do have a science degree, and I used to do research. And so this is something that we're hoping to start to really research more and more. But why would it be like myself? Let's pretend that I was, infected with nematodes, but why myself, I came down with MS, but my brothers and sisters didn't? Well, I know for myself that as a young child, I was really out of balance with my microbes. I had a lot of symptoms already. So I lost my natural defense. I don't even know if I really had a very good natural defense, because I was anemic as a baby. I was constipated. I was sensitive to grains and fussy. And then I had, went through the teens, and I had a lot of infections. My mom, in those days, the researchers, but they really scared our parents in thinking, like, if you don't put your kids on antibiotics, they're going to get strep infection, and it's going to hurt, it's going to damage their heart. So every time we would end up on, let's say, having a sore throat, my mom would beg the doctors to put us on antibiotics. So I was on a lot of antibiotics. My other brothers and sisters were too. But what was the difference between myself and them? Big difference. I was on tetracycline, which is a broad spectrum antibiotic. And in my book, I share research on how at least 70%, they looked at this huge group of people in Europe, are looking back at people, and they found that 70%, like the people that came down with inflammatory bowel disease, they had been on these broad spectrum tetracycline for a month or longer. Very, very high incidence. I think it was close to 70% of the people that had inflammatory bowel disease had been on tetracycline for months. And that was me. I had acne, and my mom was trying to help me out, and I wanted to get rid of the acne. I had no idea that it was devastating my good guys, my microbiome in my intestines. So then I would be at a higher risk, right? Because my gut, I lost my defense so much. So then if I'm out with my horses, and we're out with the cows, and we're out in the fields and all of that, then I definitely would be more susceptible to having these infections taking over. So we end up with not just these nematodes, we end up with all kinds of parasites. So my students are passing whipworms, and they're passing roundworms, and there's liver flukes, and there's so many different types of parasites that we become. So that's the thing with multiple sclerosis and chronic disease. We have to understand it's not just, let's treat the nematodes and we're better. It's like we've got to knock back. We start with the bigger ones, we knock them back. We want to make sure we don't have any nematodes in our central nervous system, and it takes months to treat them, right? Off and on, taking breaks in between. But remember, there's eggs, there's cycles, and so we have to, and they're not all living in our intestines, they're living in different parts. So that is really profound. Could that be the reason why Canada, especially our prairie provinces, have such a higher incidence of multiple sclerosis. So it could be that we have less sunshine for sure. And it could also be that maybe those nematodes, this is a better climate for them too. I don't know, because sometimes they have different animals that they work through, right? They go through ticks, they go through mosquitoes, they go through humans or domestic animals. But those of us that are getting sick are the ones that have had our microbiome, our natural defense, all those good microbes, they're so incredibly out of balance. This field of understanding how infections, how microbes that are living inside of our body, how they impact us in health and disease, that is the most heavily researched field in the world today, topic. So why is it that our local news channel, they brought this docu-series in? They didn't even mention it once. Very, very disappointing. Basically, what I see, and I'm going to wrap it up here as far as with my review of this docu-series, basically Canada's, let me see here, Brain Interrupted, Canada's Multiple Sclerosis Story. That was the title of it, and if you're in Canada, you can see little snippets online. I don't know if you can watch the whole docu-series, but to me, it felt like a big advertisement. It was just talking about how depressing it is and how you need to get counseling to manage the depression. The depression, yes, this disease is depressing, but I have heard neurologists say that it is inflammation in your brain. When you have these infections, they're inflaming your brain and making you depressed and anxious. So it's not your fault. And that's a really important thing to know. So it's not just that we can't will this away with counseling. Sure, it's good to talk through it, and it's good to get help and to get counseling if you need it. But what's so important is when you treat those infections, when you treat that inflammation, it all settles down, right? All the depression goes away. I see this all the time in my students. They all come into the program with depression, and a lot of them with anxiety, over the top anxiety, and that settles down, and they feel happy, they can cope, etc. So I'm going to go to your questions and see what you have. So all in all, my review, very, very poor. I'm very disappointed. To me, it felt like an advertisement. All they talked about, obviously they said, live a healthy lifestyle, but what does that mean? There was nothing else other than we have more pharmaceuticals now. Now we have 14 drugs. Before we had 0 drugs. It's a $23 billion a year industry. And people are suffering and people are dying, and I'm very disappointed with that docu-series. Very, very, it's kind of archaic in my view. Anyhow, you guys tell me what you think. I'm going to go over to your comments. All right, so hello, Dana. And let me see, hopefully I can get all your comments here. Hello, many people. Vicky, Ken, Amy, Valerie, Mariana, Troy, hello Troy, Vicky and Julie. All right. And Bogda, Maureen, Norris, Nancy, Rowan, Julie. I thought they can tell on an MRI because different lesions of other diseases look differently. When you really start to look at this, Julie, what I would love for you to do is to look up the clinical radiological paradox of MRIs. And you will see, yes, they can see if lesions are more active or if they're less active, but honestly, when you actually look at their scientific discussions about MRIs, you'll see that it is not very clear. Yes, you have lesions, they have to use a lot of other things, and even when they say that if we look at the lesions, we can't say if it's going to be an active or not disease. We have to consider many other things. All right, so the lesions shouldn't be there. They're pockets of infection, but they are not a conclusive diagnosis for MS. I have students that work with me that have 10 symptoms of multiple sclerosis. They have not had a diagnosis yet because they don't have lesions. They follow the program, they treat the infections, and they become symptom-free. And then, as I said, we have students that have lesions, that have many lesions, and they become symptom-free treating the infections also, and they still have the lesions. All right, so that's important to note. Thank you so much for all the love. And Facebook user. Hi, I don't know who that would be. So Marie, your question, hello, you just started walking and your legs, I just started walking and my legs just give, so your legs are giving out and you can barely move. That is because of the infections, right? That you have to treat the infections. If you don't, you will continue to become more and more disabled. Julie, wow, this makes sense. Yes, Julie. The thing is, we have to go back to common sense. We have to go back to common sense. We have to go back to becoming the director of our health. We have to create health. We don't want to manage this sickness, this disease. All right, and so hello, Neva and Joanne. You have lots of gut issues, Marie. Yes. Your gut is the biggest base camp of the infections. And in time, as we have leaky gut, and not even leaky gut, but the Borrelia can drill holes through it, parasites can move through, but we lose the integrity, we lose the integrity of the intestinal lining, and then the microbes start to move into our blood system and they start to move into different parts of our body. So many of us have maybe been a little tired for a few years before we came down with MS. What's so sad is they've been finding these worms, these little nematodes in the blood of people with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome for 15 years. It was discovered 15 years ago. And I really believe that as they start to move more into the central nervous system, then we start to see more of the MS symptoms. And that is documented with animals. All right, so Mike, and I shouldn't only say it's not only documented. We're starting to see in my students, they're starting to treat parasites more aggressively, and we're seeing huge improvements with 2 cycles of multiple antiparasitic drugs. In one student, we've seen up to an 85% improvement just after 2 rounds of doing antiparasitic drugs, and huge improvement in her mobility also. So it's so exciting. And it's not going to be cookie cutter for everyone. I wish it was, because some of us have a ton of protozoa, some of us have nematodes, some of us have more Lyme and fungal overgrowth, but all of these are the big players. The nematodes are one of the really big players. So Mike, I have MS and I need some pointers on how I can improve things in my health. I'll be sharing that in a minute. I'm going to be sharing the steps. I have a course that I teach people on what you need to do to recover from multiple sclerosis. It's not simple and easy. It's not like follow an eating plan, pop a pill, but you have to learn some skill as far as figuring out which microbes are causing. Let me put it this way. Number 1, you have to first eat in a way that you're supporting the body, but you're not feeding the infections. That's really important. The second thing is you have to support your body in multiple different ways. And I do have a masterclass training where I talk about all of that, and that's free, so you can listen to it. And I know that it will be in the feed of this video. So that is how to recover from multiple sclerosis naturally. So you got to support your body before you start killing. Otherwise, you can feel terrible. Then you've got to look at your health history. Like, how did I get sick? What happened in my life to bring me to this place? Because when you learn that, then you can make sure you never let that happen again. That's golden. And then we look at your symptoms and we see, okay, do you have a lot of parasites? We're not just going to put everybody on the same protocol because we all have different levels of different types of infections in our body. So number 1 is, do I have parasites? Do I have a lot of symptoms of parasites? Do I have symptoms of these nematodes? It's called cerebral spinal nematodiasis, meaning that in your cerebral spinal fluid, in your spinal fluid, those nematodes have moved in. So Dr. Alan McDonald has found them in every single MS specimen of spinal fluid, especially the spinal fluid that he has studied. And then once we're looking to see what types of microbes you have, then we have to look at, okay, if we can, let's start with the biggest microbe, knocking that back first, so the parasites. So my students are passing all kinds of worms, and on our calls, we share pictures of them. So they're kind enough to share them, and it doesn't gross me out at all. I'm excited and happy for them. And they're passing rope worms, which is like a biofilm community. And they're noticing huge improvements with brain fog and memory and energy. But this is where it's like peeling layers off an onion, right? And as we knock back the big ones, and then we start to knock back the fungal overgrowth. And there's many different types of fungus. We could have aspergillus, we could have mold, we could have candida, we could have many other types. So as we're treating these different groups of microbes, people get better and better and better. And in my masterclass training, you will see there's lots of case studies. And there are some wellness champions on here on the call also. And there's some brand new students that have just started. We've just started a new class. So if any of you have just found me and you're just like, oh my gosh, this sounds so exciting. I would really like to treat the cause. I would really like this year to be my year where I get back to living and get rid of this disease, to recover. I cannot promise full recovery, but what I can promise is that when you treat the infections well, and there are some things like heavy metals, etc., but it's mostly the infections that are the biggest cause of your symptoms. But if you treat them well, your disease will stop, the progression will stop, and that is more than any drug can give you. There's not one MS drug that has been proven to slow down the progression. What we're seeing in the older drugs that have been around for 20 years, they're looking back over the 20 years, and what they thought was really helpful, they're saying, we don't see any statistical difference between people that took this drug and didn't. It did not slow down the progression to disability. And that makes sense again, because none of them are treating infection. They are trapping your lymphocytes in your lymph nodes, which is a division of your immune system. They are wiping out your B cells, which is another division of your immune system. They are locking your immune system out of your central nervous system. That's not a good thing, because we know that we have microbes living in our brain and our spinal fluid. It is not a sterile environment. So when we're blocking our defense out of our brain and they're only measuring for one specific virus that would cause a rare brain infection that would kill you, there are other microbes that could kill you too. That is what these drugs do, is that they're not, I'm not against pharmaceuticals. Some of my students are using them to treat infections. But if you're using a drug to suppress your military when you have a war going on, does that make sense? No, that does not make sense. Treat the cause. That's what makes sense. So this is where, in the program, when you figure out which microbes, which groups of microbes you're dealing with, then we've got protocols as far as knocking them back. And as you're treating them, this is where people really start to notice symptom improvement, with things like balance coming back and spasticity going away and strength in your legs and your arms, and people can speak better, they can write better, just a whole transformation of their life. And what's so exciting is that, if you are in a wheelchair and you think there's no hope for you, please understand that I can't promise full recovery. But what we're seeing is that balance comes back most of the time. And I think it has more to do with how well the student is treating the infections, because balance can come back, spasticity goes away, strength comes back in legs. So if you can even move your legs a little bit, I'm sure you're going to have some recovery. You're going to have some improvements. And let's put it this way. Students say that they share that they have more recovery than they ever thought that they could, which is so amazing. So for me, with my vision, that was so long ago, I didn't have any help. That didn't improve. But we're seeing with mobility that is really helpful. Again, though, with your vision, we have students that have tremendous recoveries with their vision, where they were at risk of losing their license when they started the program, but then they kept their license because their vision improved so much. So just do the right things. Treat the cause, right? Deal with the cause of your symptoms and don't manage them anymore. And then once you treat the cause, see what your body can do in recovery. Your body is a miracle. It knows how to operate. We just have to support it. So, Teal, I recently just found out from your videos in the past few days, or you just found my videos, and you just started crying. I hope it's a happy cry. You were just diagnosed with MS within the past year or two, and you believe that you managed to push back a lot of the symptoms. You changed your diet and working out, but you know that you need to do more. And that's the key, is that there is no diet and there is no exercise that will get these nematodes out of your central nervous system, that will get the protozoa out of your blood. Yes, it's important. Diet is the first step. That is vitally important. And yes, activity is super important for your immune function. But by the time we have things like ALS and Parkinson's or MS or any of these horrible, terribly strong neurodegenerative chronic diseases, we have such a high level of infection in our body that we have to knock it back. Our immune system needs help. So you're absolutely right. Hello, Matt, Josephine, And Olivia, possibility to my doctor, let me see. A couple of years ago, you talked to your doctor a couple of years ago about hormones, and he told you that you were crazy. You're not crazy. And I just want to say one word of caution to all you lovely ladies out there, is that when we take hormones, whether they're bioidentical or whether they are synthetic, we're changing our biochemistry in our body in ways that we don't understand. So when we take hormones in, we may have some symptom relief. We may feel a little better, but that is masking the problem. That, remember I said it's suppressing your immune system, it's feeding the infections. So what I see in time is that women that take extra hormones, they end up with things like endometriosis, fibroid cysts, what else? We know that the Stats Canada website, which is a Government Canada website, is that they say that if a woman has been on hormone replacement therapy for 5 years or longer, they double their risk of arthritis, which is an inflammatory condition, which is caused by infection also. So what I see in women is that a lot of times what we think our hormones are out of balance. We know that these infections, some of them, like for example, Candida, can produce chemicals that are acting like hormones in our body. So it can just, and a lot of the other chemicals, they just throw our endocrine system for a loop. As you treat the infections, as you build up nutrition and you get the toxins down from the infection, your body just goes back to normal. And then all of a sudden women are like, I don't have PMS symptoms anymore. Or I thought I was going through menopause and I don't have these hot flashes or night sweats anymore. So like, what's going on? And it's all stemming from infections. And you're not crazy, Olivia. Symptoms feel worse with stress. So pay attention to this. So if you are dealing with a load of different microbes in your blood and in your central nervous system, and remember that your intestines are the highest concentration of these infections. When we have stress, again, that changes the chemistry in our body. We have more cortisol released. And that will change. We may have more sugar in our blood. We have our immune system more suppressed. So the cortisol affects our immune regulation and it affects the blood sugar and probably many other things. But both of those things would impact infections. And it's a stress. It's a chronic stress on our body. So that's why when we have these infections, we don't tolerate stress like we should. So for a lot of us, it's not necessarily that stress gave us MS. It's that when we are so out of balance from years and years of antibiotic use and feeding the problem with the processed carbs and too many grains and too many breads and taking maybe some hormones and taking other medications, high stress, pregnancy, not sleeping is another big one. All of these factors make those infections grow and grow and continue to move into different parts of our body. And then we end up with a chronic disease label, not just multiple sclerosis. All right, I'm just going to wrap it up here. So there is, if you're at a place where you are like, I can't believe that there is hope for me. I can't believe that it's just infection. The sad reality is that doctors have been knowing that infection is the cause of multiple sclerosis for almost I'd say at least 30 years, because that's when their books were written. So 30 years ago, I found 4 books written by medical doctors that were saying that MS and all chronic disease is caused by infection. If you treat the infections, the disease will stop and you'll have a lot of recovery. And that is why I've lived MS-free for the past 28 years, is because I took a different path. So you can take the path of standard of care that they were talking about in this global series that I was sharing with you, in Brain Interrupted, and it's very depressing. And they listen to what they say. They say most people start off with relapsing remitting, and then in time, pretty much everybody is progressive, secondary progressive, because the drugs no longer work. My question is, did they ever work in the first place? Because we don't really know. And this research, when drugs have been out for a while, the research is saying that it doesn't work. And it makes sense. If you have infection and you're suppressing your immune system, you will still become disabled, right? Because those infections will keep taking over more of your body and you'll have other microbes moving in, causing other infections. You're going to get different disease labels because bugs like to live, I call them bugs, but they're more microbes. They like to live in different parts of the body. Some like your joints, some like your sinuses, some like the central nervous system. You may notice the floaters in your eyes. So different microbes like to live in different parts of your body. And so what we're doing is we are treating the cause. And all of that is explained in my masterclass training. It's free. Go and listen to it. And if you're at a place where you listen to it and you're super excited and you know you're a wellness champion, come and join our group. We have a new class starting, and in the next 3 months, we're going to have a bunch of new graduates of wellness champions that have really hunkered down, build a plan, had a lot of recovery. There will be always a small number that are symptom-free, 2 or 3, but most of them will be, 30% better, 40% better, 60% better, 80%. It really depends on how quickly and how well they implement. But it takes months, not years, to recover if you treat the cause. Last couple of questions here. Hello, Joanna and Tom. Some of these faces I haven't seen for a while. Yes, there's evidence that multiple sclerosis is an infectious disease. If you haven't seen that, please look at that link and share it with your doctors, share it with other people that have MS. Let's get this information out. Let's get Dr. Alan McDonald's research out. Let's get more and more researchers interested in studying these parasites. I honestly think that we are, thank you for the love, I honestly think that things are going to go fast. We have this community of several hundred wellness champions, and you guys are the ones, the trailblazers, the leaders, the forward thinkers. You guys are going to help get the word out. Thank you so much for that. And with the UTIs all the time, Julie is saying, because she's been on so many antibiotics, yes. So kombucha, we're finding that the kombucha we would avoid until we've treated the infections well, because there's several reasons for that. The raw sauerkraut is the only one that we start with. But remember that your UTIs, it's not just E. coli or what they're treating in your GI tract. There are multiple parasites and other bacteria that become a problem there. And there are biofilms, and I teach all of that in my program. So there's these slimy coats or tents that they live underneath, and they're protecting themselves from the antibiotics. And that's why we get reoccurrent UTIs. But if you treat the infections well enough and you treat the biofilms, then you will no longer have UTIs. Hello, Wanda, and hello, Jeff and Gary. Some wonderful faces I haven't seen for a long time. How do I figure out which parasites I have? That's a really good question, Teal. We don't have good tests, that's the honest. So you can go and get a comprehensive stool analysis done for $500, and I've never done one because I know I'm not going to find anything. Most of these microbes do not live in your intestines. Sometimes they come back to mate in your intestines, but they don't live there, unfortunately. There are some that will be there, but you're 9 out of 10, it'll get missed. So we've had, just recently, had one student who sent a stool analysis to a really good lab. He has a good reputation. He's a retired parasitologist. I would trust him that he would take time and look, but didn't find anything. Sent her back. You don't have any parasites, you're clear. 2 days later, she passed a big whipworm, and I'm talking I would think at least that long, a whipworm, and sent it back to the lab, and they said, yes, that is a whipworm. So it's very frustrating. So the biggest thing is symptoms, and that's how we do it in the program, is we look at groups of symptoms. And if any of you are grads that haven't been around a long time, make sure you go in the members area, because I put a whole bunch more information in there. All of this nematode information, which is so interesting, and help us spread the word. But honestly, we go on symptoms, and there are specific protocols. So for example, there is a really awesome hero doctor that has a lot of experience in treating parasites. He says that he never ever prescribes one antiparasitic drug at the same time, because he knows that people that have chronic disease, we have multiple parasites. So he will use 3 to 5 antiparasitic drugs at one time. That's a lot. And I'm seeing that my students are handling it really well. Is that just going to cure you quickly? No. Everybody's different. So we have some students that start with herbs, a blend of antiparasitic herbs, and they're passing worms and obviously smaller ones I can't see, but they're feeling better and better. Every single person is different. And this has to do with our environment for sure too, because some people I'm not going to get into it because we could talk forever on it, but I will be talking more about these different topics. What I'd like to do next week is, this is so important. I shared with you the types of microbes and where they're living, but I want to give you pictures. I want you to visually see, because when you see these little critters and you really understand that, oh my gosh, this is what's living in my blood, and this is what's living in my intestines, and this is what's living in my central nervous system, and these little guys, you can imagine the havoc that these little worms would cause when they're flipping around and swimming around inside of your spinal fluid. And they're there in a lot of, I would say all of the ones that he studied, in every single brain and spinal fluid of people that have multiple sclerosis. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. So can you type that out, please? Sorry, I'm not sure. You're so welcome, Margaret, that this has been so informative. And like I said, very, very sad that, you know, what's coming out in the mainstream media is so archaic, and it honestly felt like a big advertisement. And I don't know if any of you guys have seen it from Canada, but I'd love to, if you guys want to put your comments down, that would be awesome. So Maureen, is it possible to be misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis because of the lesions? Honestly, multiple sclerosis is a collection of infections, and there's parasites, there's fungus, there's Borrelia most often, and all of us, every single person with MS, we have different amounts of the different microbes, and there's different bacteria too. So when I say Lyme, there's a lot of, so multiple, that's what it is. And the toxins from those, and also heavy metals. And when you clean up all those factors, you get well. And then you've got to build back your natural defense. Lots of amazing questions. Yes, Rachel, it makes so much more sense. And this is how people are recovering, is following common sense, going back to common sense. And thank you, Rachel. You got my book. I hope that you enjoy it. I'm super excited to support you. You're looking forward to starting my course. Exciting to, sorry, I don't know if you're a brand new wellness champion or not. We've had a lot of people joining in the last little while, but whenever you are ready, I'm super excited. Hello, Matt. You agree. Awesome. I want an update from you. All right. From working with that doctor. I just want to hear where you're at, because my students are they're breaking ground, and I'm sure that within the next 5 years, we're going to be so much more streamlined with the best and effective way to treat these critters. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. So if you're ready, make sure you listen to my masterclass training. And if you are ready, only if you are ready, then you can book a time to chat with me. You can join us. You can start right away recovering with a whole group. There's over 50 people in the class right now from all over the world recovering from multiple sclerosis and other chronic diseases too, but mostly MS. Make sure that you listen to, I've got a whole bunch of free things on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, Live Disease Free. My book, Become a Wellness Champion, talks a lot about these infections and women's hormones, etc. A lot of research based there. So you've got lots, and I hope to support you in the future. Next week, I'm going to be sharing you pictures of the things that are living inside of your body. And if you're squeamish, you might have to turn your face. All right. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.